Hi everyone, you're listening or watching Let's Psyconnect. This is LT.
And this is Ronnie.
So today we're doing an episode as part of our IGTV series. So you can either watch us on our Instagram account, Let's Psyconnect, or you can listen to our podcast episode as well. So we are going to be talking with Dr. St Jean. But before we get to her and tell you why, let's tell us why she is here today. So we're going to talk more about being a child, being a teenager in school. And we're going to focus on that period in our lives, right? That we went through school, or the children that are going through school, and it affects their mental health. And what is the role of the psychologist, or what role can a psychologist undertake in order to promote mental health awareness? So we're going to talk about that and much more. So stay tuned, and we're excited for sure. But let's share some stats with you first, because we do like to do some background before we go in details here and get more out of this conversation. So according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, so 1 in 5 children and adolescents experience mental health problem during their school years. So think about it like a classroom of 25 students. So now we have 5 of them struggling with the same issues that adults also struggle with. So depression, anxiety, substance abuse. And now let's think about possible triggers or variables that can influence that type of presentation or symptomatology. So we're talking about stress, like school is already stressful, if you all remember. Anxiety, bullying is something that happens in school and outside of school. Family problems, and then if there's already a predisposition for depression, has learning disability, right? And then, as I said, alcohol and substance abuse that can also lead to other mental health symptoms. And we're not to forget here something that has gained attention, because again, it's very important that we intervene and provide proper treatment before it gets to that point. So something that has increased is suicidality or suicidal related behavior. We know that it's increasing, and it's alarming, and it's a concern, and we want to do something about it. And it's estimated that up to 60% of the students do not receive treatment due to stigma, okay, and lack of services or access to service at school and outside of school. And all of those who actually get help, nearly 2/3 only in school, and that might not be enough to address the interventions or the treatment needed for that type of setting, right? So we need something else outside of school as well. So, okay, I gave you guys a little bit of background of what we're here today. So let's talk about this with Dr. St Jean.
Yeah, so we are so excited to have Dr. St Jean here with us. And, you know, LT, you gave a lot of great background information and stats. And really what I take away from it, and I hope our listeners and viewers do too, is that this population, this set of people, they are of critical concern to us, right? I think that this is a very critical point in their lifespan and developmental trajectory, right? So as an individual working with this population, of course, we need to be mindful of that. And the way that we do that is to have these conversations. So welcome, Dr. St. Jean. I'm going to read just a little bit of your bio, and then I will ask you to add anything you would like, okay?
Sounds great.
All right. Dr. St. Jean is a licensed psychologist in the Southern New Hampshire area. She earned a Master of Science degree in clinical psychology and a doctoral degree in counseling and school psychology from River University in Nassau, New Hampshire. Dr. St. Jean completed her APA-approved pre-doctoral internship at the Rochester Institute of Technology in the Priority Behavioral Health Internship Consortium, and her postdoctoral training fellowship at Hillside Children's Center in upstate New York. She utilizes various forms of evidence-based treatment into her clinical approach, especially in dialectical behavior therapy, in which she pursued additional training during her postdoctoral training year. Dr. St. Jean's clinical interests include trauma-informed care, systems-level consultation, family systems, supervision, psychological and neuropsychological evaluations, and of course, supervision. So welcome, Dr. St. Jean. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm good. I'm so excited to be part of this.
Very well. Yeah, so we just want to ask you a little bit from your words. Of course, I read your beautiful bio, and it gave us a lot of great background information about you. But just from your words, just tell us a little bit about your journey to where you're at right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important when we talk about that. Yeah, as you said, I mean, there's kind of a tongue twister for a lot of it. But I have my master's in clinical psychology and my doctorate in counseling and school psychology. What actually happened was I got my master's, and about 6 months after graduation, I realized I don't want to be doing anything other than psychology. At the time, I was working for Apple, and I just felt like I wasn't helping people in the capacity that I wanted. So that's why I applied to the program. And what I really like about it is New Hampshire is a very small state. So being in a doctorate program and being a psychologist, it's very important to stay connected to other psychologists, and lots of advocacy happens in the state at the psychology or psychologist level. So that's really why I wanted to get into it. Is there really the mental health up here? There's just not a lot of providers. The network adequacy is pretty poor, and there's a lot of people who need help in this area. So that's really why I got into it. Also just seeing family and friends experience their own mental health concerns and crises, and just seeing what they had to go through, and not just the people experiencing that, but also their family and their friends and what that looks like, and in the ripple effect that it has. So that's what I really thought was, it was important for me to do this. And I also just see myself as a lifelong learner. I would go to school for my whole life if it wasn't for student loans. I just love to learn. And in psychology, it's almost a requirement. You have to continue learning. You have to know evidence-based and research and stay on top of things. So I feel like it just sort of found me. I really feel like I was made to do this. And there's no better feeling than that. Absolutely not. I love talking about psychology. So it's a good thing I have a podcast or Zoom to do that.
Good. Well, thank you for sharing a little bit of about your journey, for sure. You still sound so passionate about it, and it keeps us, I guess, as students, still motivated. Like, yes, we like this,
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, what would you even tell, I guess, some students who might deciding, trying to figure it out, should I be a psychologist at a school setting versus clinical setting, or become a consultant, or fight, with lobbyists, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important topic to talk about, because as a psychologist, you can branch off in so many different areas. And that's really what intrigued me about it in the first place, is you can be in a school, you can be in a clinical setting. You're so multifaceted and needed in so many areas that it's kind of unfortunate, but we have really good job security. I love the ability to really tap into different areas. So what I would say, I think that doctoral students or students in a master's program have a lot of pressure on them to know what is their theoretical orientation. What do you want to, what population do you want to focus on? What setting do you want to work in? There's so many things that you have to figure out in addition to going to class and your practicum and internships. You have so much going on that what I would say, and I don't know if other psychologists would agree with what I'm about to say, but I think it's so important to just slow it down, take a step back. Your first year, your second year, you do not have to know what you're going to do. You might get into a field and realize you don't really like that setting. And the great thing is you can change to another setting. I think there was a lot of pressure, at least in my program, to figure out what is my orientation, the theoretical orientation. What population do I want to work with? And mine has switched a couple times. I used to work with adults, now I work with children. And although it's really important if you want to have a specialty or you really want to focus on one thing to be an expert in that area, some people know and they go with it, and that's fantastic. We need those people. But for someone like me who is excited about all things psychology, I love being able to really dabble and be more of a generalist. That's helped me really create a good network where I am. I'm a lobbyist. I'm on the New Hampshire Psychological Association board. I do stuff in schools. I work in a group practice. So I'm able to be very versatile. And I think that doctoral students need to just find what they love and know that it's not the end all be all. You do not have to stay with that population. The beauty of working with children and families is they grow up to be adults, and knowing the lifespan is great. So I think there's a lot of pressure. Just take in and absorb as much as you can. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I actually miss being supervised and being in classes. The whole time I was there, all I wanted to do was be done and graduate. Like, it's incredible to have those mentors and those supervisors and just absorb as much as you possibly can. I can tell you how many times I go back and look at my notes or my books from the classes I took, and I get something out of it every single time. So I think it's really important to just be gentle with yourself, slow yourself down, and know that you do not have to make that decision within the first year or the second.
Or that we can change our minds later.
Of course. I mean, no education or knowledge is wasted. Education or knowledge, it can always be utilized, and that's why I think psychology is so cool.
I think this was so refreshing and inspirational. I mean, we're still students here, so we're almost done. But we're not, to the students out there, early career or even late career, to hear about your journey and learning like how many roles or hats you actually wear as a psychologist, and that you can still make a difference and you can still be knowledgeable, you can still be effective,
Absolutely, 100%. I fully believe in that.
Yeah, and I just want to add two quick things that you said, Dr. St. Jean. Number one, what a great profession that we're able to be so dynamic. And, if you do focus in one area, it doesn't mean that you're handcuffed to that for the entirety of your work career. So I think that's an amazing tool that we can use as student clinicians and of course as clinicians. And secondly, you mentioned earlier that, when you receive a doctorate or anybody receives their degree, the learning doesn't stop there. And again, I think that's another beautiful thing about our career is that we are, especially with the research coming out, there's so much research every single day. And it's up to us, and it is our duty to really keep up with that and to understand different forms of treatment that are coming out and recommendations, things like that.
Yeah. So, and with that, for instance, like Ronnie and I, we don't work with children, but that doesn't stop us on being interested in learning and being educated and participating in discussions that can inform, because as you said, they can become adults later, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I'm not saying that, if you don't have any experience as a licensed psychologist, don't go work with children specifically, get the supervision you need. So
right.
But yeah, like you said, it's just so diverse and multifaceted, and we can change populations and settings and still make a huge difference, which is so cool. It's such a privilege to be able to do that.
So now we're gonna get into the details, right? Gonna dig a little bit more about your role in school settings. As I said, Ronnie and I, we don't work in that setting or with that population whatsoever, but we hear about things, right? We talk to other professionals who may be also playing that or similar role, or we see things on TV and whatnot. But so let's share a little bit about your experience with our listeners and too. So what is like, to work with teachers and parents? So tell us a little bit more.
Yeah. So my experience working in a school, I think it's very unique. I mean, you're at the forefront where you get to see, kids spend so much time in school. So you're able to get great access to them, which you might not be able to get in a more clinical setting. Whether I do a lot of evaluations and testing rather than the counseling aspect, but I get to work with the counselors and help consult and supervise with them. I think it's really unique. I mean, I graduated 3 years ago. So although I'm still pretty green and fresh, as of now, I have yet to have a bad experience with a teacher or even parents, which I think is very telling. Have I had difficult conversations that aren't necessarily fun and sometimes they can be ugly? Yes. However, I think it's really unique opportunity where parents and teachers, they want to help the kids, right? That, you know, that's what they're there for. So going in, I think one of the most important things I've learned, and I learned it quickly, is even though I'm an expert, in quotes, in this field, I'm not an expert on a parent's child. They are the experts on that child. I am not in the classroom 6 hours a day with these kids or these teenagers. The teachers are. So if they're telling me something and maybe I don't see that manifest in a scale if I'm doing testing, or you know, they're saying that these kids are struggling in some way, but they don't act that way when I see them, I need to trust what they see and I need to listen. Right? I think it's so important to listen. And I have found that particularly teachers, they are so open to having, at least where the district where I work, they're so open to having psychologists and mental health professionals in the classrooms because it has such an impact on students' learning and their behavior. They're very open to learning. They often seek me out with questions. And I think really the relationship, we know in therapy that the therapeutic relationship is one of the most important aspects of treatment. And I think it's the exact same thing when it comes to working with teachers and parents. You have to establish that relationship if you're going to get anywhere. I'm not going in and telling them what they're doing right or wrong. I'm listening, I'm observing, I'm taking all that information in before I actually provide them with a treatment plan or my recommendations. So often we just don't listen, you know, and you don't need a psychology or doctorate degree to listen. So I think it's very, very unique, interesting position that instead of a individual one-to-one therapy session, I'm able to really expand that message to a huge audience, which I think is so cool. So I really like it. I never saw myself working in schools ever. I ended up really liking it. I think kids and like teenagers, they're hilarious and they're awesome. And I think they're so cool. So I love hanging out with them.
That is awesome. I mean, I think there's a lot of judgment when it comes to maybe talking to teachers, like the idea that we're there to tell them what to do. This is how you talk. Don't do this anymore, you know, and it can be frustrating, I guess, to teachers to hear that kind of yes and no type of situation, and parents too, right? Because parents don't want to see themselves as the people who are doing things wrong by their children, and it's like, no, you can't do this ever with a child again. So, like listening, it's the ingredient, right? It's a
right, and let me add to that. So if you could just tell us a little bit about maybe your approach to if you do have to intervene with a parent, how do you do that in a supportive way and an empathetic way?
Yeah, well, I think that the word you just say, empathetic, you need to have empathy, step one. Because again, you might see this kid for what, an hour or 2 hours. I'm not at home with them. I don't see what this is like. I might not see those behaviors or what this family is going through. Also to think, what are the parents going through personally outside of the child? And how does that change the lens that they are approaching things with? So I think having a lot of empathy, listening, and the most important thing I think you could possibly do for a student or a parent is providing empowerment. The job and our goal is to empower them. So how do we meet them where they're at, listen to their concerns, listen to that, and I always go for strength-based. What is the parent doing right? What is the teacher doing right? Let's capitalize on that than just picking out the bad. They're going to just put up a wall if I just start any conversation out with all the things they're doing wrong. So I think empathizing and provide, like trying to just empower them as best as I can, and letting them know that they have the ability to help and that we are there to help too. You know, very often when I have to have difficult conversations with parents, whether that's telling them that their student has a learning disability or that their student was either being picked on with bullying, or maybe their child is the bully. No parent wants to hear hard news. Like that's a lot to take in. So I really just slow the conversation down. I sit with them, I listen to them. I'm not on my laptop, I'm not taking notes. I'm having a one-on-one conversation with them. I provide them with all of my contact information. I follow up with them a few days later, because sometimes news can be difficult to digest, whether it's good or bad. And I always follow up, because I'm the type of person that I could be talking to someone and an hour later I come up with a question I wanted to ask, or I have a point I wanted to make.
Me too.
Right? Like, we all do it. So I just treat them at the same level that I would want to be treated. I mean, it's really the basic stuff. It's how do I empathize? And being a parent, I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine how hard it is. And there's so much. And being a teacher and all the demands they have, and being a student, like, this is hard. I'm here to listen. I'm here to provide my expertise when appropriate, but it needs to start with having a relationship. And that is so, so, so important, because barriers can go up very quickly.
Right.
And there's one thing that you just said right now, right? You're not a parent, and there's a lot of wall that, rises when people hear, oh, you're not a parent. What are you going to tell me? You don't know what it's like to be a parent. And it sounds like you have built relationships with the parents, the teachers, in a way that it shows that you don't have to be a parent to talk about mental health, to talk about behaviors, to talk about X, Y, and Z, right? Bring in your knowledge, and they can apply that knowledge.
100%. I mean, I get that often. Whenever there's sort of a tense conversation going on, and really I lean into those, I love them because it means something's happening.
Right.
I often get asked, are you a parent? I respond no, and then they have something to say. Or I get when did you graduate? Like, how young are you? They sort of question what I'm doing or how experienced I am. I think the best thing you can do in those situations is validate. You're right. I don't know what it's like to be a parent. I'm sure it's extremely hard. And just really having those open-ended questions and just validating as much as possible. You are absolutely right. Being a parent is tough. Tell me more about that. And just using it as openings for conversations. Who doesn't like to be validated? I don't think we do that enough.
Right.
So providing with that, I really think helps sort of break down the barriers and the walls that are automatically put up, especially if you think that I don't know what relationships this family has had with previous providers. What if they had a really bad experience and they're going to automatically think that I'm the same way? I've had a bad experience with providers. We've all know providers that probably shouldn't be practicing. So it's really important to just keep that open mindset, not take anything personally. And it's not about you. It's not about your ego. If you're wrong, say you're wrong. If you're, frustrated, confused, you say those things. You have the conversation. And I think it all starts there. That's the most important thing we can do.
That is so inspirational again. I mean, I'm learning so much. This is great. I mean, again, like we're students, right? And we can apply that in other settings too. It doesn't have to be school settings. It's just being genuine and being authentic too, and trying to put yourself in other people's shoes. You might be the parent, in the future that you'll be talking to a professional about your child, right? So
absolutely. We don't do that enough, I think, in society. So we definitely don't do it in this practice, not because we're trying to, I don't know, have a bad conversation or do something wrong, but sometimes we just don't think about it. Like, we overthink on all these things, and we have to be professional. And what about evidence-based this and research that? And it's like, just take a step back and just be human with them. Show them that you have emotions too, that you might not get it, but you can sit in that discomfort. I think it's one of the most powerful things we can do is sit in those uncomfortable, awkward situations.
Yeah, that is such great advice, especially for student clinicians and anybody working their way up, and even young clinicians, right? Is being comfortable and leaning in toward that and using that in the therapeutic process, and not backing away or trying to defend yourself or get defensive yourself, right? Because their questioning is a form of defensiveness, and you don't want to meet defensiveness with defensiveness. So I think that's amazing advice to our listeners and viewers who are in the field.
Yeah, it highlights some of the challenges that you have faced and how to overcome them. And I'm wondering though, if there was a challenge for you that you sat with that challenge for a little while, and how did you overcome that? And if it was a teacher, a parent, or student?
Yeah, so as soon as you said that, my mind automatically goes back to my postdoc year, where I worked at a residential facility, and there was a school on campus, and I was working individually with a teenager who had a slew and a host of trauma history and just a very difficult upbringing. And I had to work directly with her parents, adoptive parents, who were not there. It was always something over the phone. And what was very frustrating about it is that they were very, very negative in thinking that their child, their daughter, just would never get better. That what's the point of trying this? What's the point of doing therapy? What's the point of these things? This is just how it is. And that was hard because I have the defense in me that no, like this is so important and evidence tells us that we can help and we can make differences. But also a lot of walls were automatically up because they had very difficult experiences with providers in the past. And also the parents didn't necessarily like that I was a postdoc student. I didn't know what I was talking about. I had a couple different conversations where they wanted to work with a male provider, not a female provider. So there were just a lot of barriers. And what was the best thing that I could possibly do? I had a supervisor who changed the way that I will always practice for the better. And every single time I got myself in a place where I just didn't know what to say, or I felt like, you know what, you're right. I don't know what to, like, I just want to throw my hands up and you can work with someone else. I always went back to what does the evidence and the research say? I specifically was doing DBT with this client, and I would always go back to what data and information can I use to shape the conversation that I was having, right? So how can I be a human and meet them where they're at and validate that, yeah, like this is really hard. But then also, how can I use the information that I have? And what do we know about DBT, which was a great fit for this child? What do I know, or how can I use it to shape my language? Also, one of the things that I did is, instead of always having these phone conversations, we sent them a tablet so we could have video conferencing. Because for me, it was really hard to try and connect with someone when I couldn't see them, right? The nonverbal language. Right. I just didn't know how to navigate it. And every time I would call this parent, I found myself getting nervous. So a lot of times in supervision, we would talk about what do these emotions bring up for me? What does that look like for the client, right? Transference, countertransference, all of those fun things. Having the video, the tablet, made a world of difference. So it's the little things. It's using evidence-based treatment. What does that say? How can we use the research to guide our treatment? That's the biggest thing. So how do we guide our treatment, and how do I make this be a little more relatable and personable? And if that's a simple switch from going from a phone to a camera, that's awesome. Did it solve everything? Absolutely not. But did it help? It really did. It really did. So I think there are going to be times where you deal with people who have histories and they're acting the way they are for a reason, right? We know that behavior, there's always a reason behind the behavior. And just like for this child, there's a reason behind the behavior for those parents. So I think it's really important to remember those things. And you can't win them all, right? All you can do is your best, and always, even with difficult parents, I had to be there for the client. Right? At the end of the day, I can do what I can with the parents, but what am I doing for that student, that client, that child who I'm working with? That's the person that I need to have the best connection with. And you build from there. But it was hard. It was definitely hard. I always have flashbacks to that.
Well, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that experience with us today, especially because you're feeling the emotions right now too. It's not that easy.
Yes, absolutely.
And you kind of touched on it a little bit. So I was actually going to ask about the stigma associated with psychology and dealing with the parents, but you touched on it with that example. And it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of it is again being empathetic and not shying away from that conversation. And of course, psychoeducation, right? I think that's something that LT and I talk about a lot, is psychoeducation with the patients and making sure that you're on the same page. But of course, in a school setting or any setting when you're working with caregivers or parents, psychoeducation to them is just as important. So they're on the same page, right?
Yes, so powerful. I'm glad you said that. I am such a fan of psychoeducation. I love providing resources and educating, because think about it, if a parent comes in, they don't have the background and the knowledge that we have in psychology, that can be really scary, right? That here's this person telling me what's wrong in quotes with my child, and they just don't have the ability to understand, because they don't have the resources to learn and educate themselves. So I think psychoeducation is so important for whether it's the client or the system, right? The system of people who work with that client. It's so important, and really just letting that guide you, letting that guide the treatment, and always going back to that, and remembering that even though these conversations might be hard to have, we're reinforcing negative behaviors if we shy away from it. Yeah. We need to show them and model why we are having these difficult conversations. I think that's the biggest piece of advice I could give to a student or a psychologist, is just leaning into it. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. It's what we do. That's literally, I think, what it comes down to being a psychologist is setting.
So speaking of talking about difficult or having difficult conversation, what is like, or what do you propose, or what have you seen when it comes to having difficult conversations, let's say racial trauma, diversity, minority, and the list is going to go on here, so we can choose the topic, or you can talk about them all too, because if we can address trauma, we can talk about bullying, suicide. There's so much.
I mean, there's so much, and I think that alone, when we think about, the main population I work with now is adolescents. I work in a middle school and some in a high school. I think it's so important that you just named off all those things, which are heavy topics in and of itself. Putting us in the position of an adolescent, I can't imagine having to handle all those things at once in high school, where an adolescent's brain isn't even fully developed, and we're expecting them to be able to handle these hard things. Like that's just not fair. Mm-hmm. So I think that as a psychologist, I am expected and almost required to be an advocate. That's what we do, is we advocate, which means standing up for racial injustice, standing up for bullying, having zero tolerance for those things, and being vocal about those. Is it uncomfortable sometimes? Yes. But I take myself and my privilege. I'm from New Hampshire, which is very, for the most part, rural, I guess you could say. Rural, predominantly white state. I'd say mixed politics, but for the most part, there's not a lot of diversity here. So we have these students coming through the education system who might not have had any exposure to actual diversity and what it means to be privileged, and what privileges they have, which are a lot. So I think that in what we know is that research informs us that having students become involved with social justice and community type programs, there is that correlation to having a more positive future and being have less prejudice, being more mindful of their privileges. We know that these things help, so we need to start having this conversation as early as possible. Even if we don't live in a very diverse area, we still need to have them, and I feel that it is extremely important that myself, as a white privileged person, I need to share and I need to show and model what that looks like is to own my privilege and do something about it and to use my voice. So I think that instead of staying away from it just because we don't have the diversity in this area, we need to just start, again, empowering and educating the youth to be able to use their voices. And what does that mean? You know, where, yes, I'm in New Hampshire, but I live 40 minutes from Boston, right?
Right.
You know, it is our backyard. So the younger that we can start having those conversations, the better. And I do think it is my responsibility to make sure that the school administration or administrators and the teachers and the, you know, the principal, assistant principal, I need to have those conversations with them to make sure and hold them accountable for what's being taught in the classroom, for what curriculums are being taught. How are these conversations happening? And sticking on that and hounding them to make sure it happens. I'm sure that there are times where they see my name come up in an email or asking for a meeting and they're like, oh God, here she goes again. That's what I do, right? Advocacy looks different depending on the topic, but it doesn't matter if it's bullying, if it's suicide, if it's racial injustice, all of those things, we need to have a very firm, powerful stance on it. And we have to model what's right. And I take that very seriously.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, right, you know, 1 in 5 children or teenagers are experiencing mental health concerns, right, and could be diagnosed with a mental health diagnosis. And so we got to start talking about those things, right? We got to start talking about substance use and abuse. What does that look like, right, for a teenager, for a child? And what does trauma look like for them, right? And what bullying, like, is it okay? Is it not okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that depending on where you are in the country, town, however you want to, you know, geographically where you are, there's always going to be trauma. You know, trauma doesn't discriminate. One thing that what I focus on this past year is teaching teachers and administrators about ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, and actually how can we implement those in the classroom to really screen where kids are coming from. My state specifically, huge case, the heroin overdoses is it's significant. And the kids that are now coming in, we're starting to see kindergarten, first grade, it's their parents that some parents might not be alive because they have died through addiction, or they have family or friends or people that they know, right? That's a form of trauma. So even though the ACEs might look differently in this part of the country, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just might take on a different form. So being educated about complex trauma, right, and intergenerational trauma, that how would these people know what that is if they didn't go to school for these things? I think it's really we should be held accountable for providing that information. So for the district I worked in, we worked with ACEs and doing social emotional curriculums, but that might look different for different areas in different populations. But at the end of the day, it's up to us.
Ronnie, do you want to jump in? My brain is already working here to ask more questions, but go ahead.
If you're going to ask about the same topic, go ahead, because I was jumping around as well. So go ahead.
No, I was actually going to transition here. So since we talk about trauma, right, and suicide, it's something that's of increasing concern. And so we didn't necessarily mention social media, but we can talk about social media use too, and the impact, because right now we talk about cyberbullying too, right? But I do want to tell our listeners and our viewers too that she is going to come back for one more episode, if not more, but we'll talk more in depth about bullying, because we think it's an important topic and we want to dedicate more time for that as well.
Yes, absolutely.
If you want to add, I was going to just transition to talking about something that it was on the news, you know, it was talked about for a long time, you know, the last season just came out. And it probably influenced and has shaped the discussion. It's probably going to bring in mental health professionals again to talk more about the influence of 13 Reasons Why in our children and teenagers in society. So what do you have to say about this? You don't have to share necessarily your opinion about the characters, blah, 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 blah. But like, what is your experience so far when it comes to talking to teachers and parents about it? Or what have you heard?
Yeah. So I think you'll be proud of me. First off, I did finish all of the seasons. I worked very hard the past week to get through all of them. So I'm very proud of myself for that. So yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on it. I don't know if I've even been able to really digest all of it. However, what it comes down to is what we're doing right now. We're talking about it. There's nothing better than that. We're opening up the conversation, which is amazing. I mean, I think some parts of it, I watch and I try to take my psychologist like hat off when I watch it, because in my mind, I'm like, where are the parents or where are the teachers? How are they having this party? So I think I get a little too into it, but I love the fact that these things are being talked about. And even as I'm watching it, I'm having the thoughts of, oh my God, like this is so much. Like, how are kids they're going from bullying to sexual assault to suicide. And there are so many heavy topics that my first reaction was, well, this isn't an accurate portrayal, right? I mean, these things don't, within a 50-minute session, you don't have all of those things happening at a school or in a community. However, all of these things happen. These are things that are on the minds of children and adolescents. These are the situations and the experiences that they're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And if I think that's heavy, then I need to really look into why I think that's heavy and what do we do about it. Mm-hmm. I love the idea that there's a show that is opening up lines of communication. I've had some parents who didn't necessarily like watching it. And like you said, I mean, you don't have to necessarily comment on the characters or specific things, but the overall gist is I've had someone come in my office and a parent was really upset that their child watched this. And I understand that it can absolutely be triggering 100%. And I think that we have to be very mindful of that, and that, have mindfulness around how difficult this can be for some students. It can be very triggering. But what I told that parent when they were upset is, I hear you, I understand what you're saying. And at the same time, you're coming to my office and you're having this conversation with me. And right. That wouldn't have happened without it. So I think that having these things that are these shows that are just getting it out there, that, yeah, these are serious things. And these are things that teenagers are dealing with. And no teenager should have to deal with these things alone. I think what was frustrating for me watching it is, I don't know what season, but at some point I'm like, where are the counselors? Where are the parents? Like, if no child should have to bear the burden of holding on to such heavy secrets and having to navigate that. I mean, the pressure is insurmountable. Mm-hmm. So and again, I mean, I know they had to do that because it's a TV show and they had to have a spin on it, but so many of these things, it was heartbreaking for me that these kids didn't have or feel that they could go to adults that they could trust, or that maybe they just weren't there, right? Mm-hmm. It's not always that easy. One of my biggest frustrations is when someone will say to someone who's experiencing depression or suicidal ideation, and it's like, well, why don't you just call the suicide hotline, or why don't you call someone you trust? It's not that easy. Yeah. Not that easy, right? You're suffering. You're at the lowest of lows. Calling someone or reaching out is not really going to be the first thing on their minds. Mm-hmm. So I think it really is important that we take a step back and start talking about these conversations and what it brought up for us positively and negatively. I love that it starts opening up the conversation. Everything starts there. If we aren't talking about it, how are we going to address it?
Yeah.
Right.
I don't remember many moments, if there was ever a moment where maybe there was a family dinner and it's like, let's talk about bullying, This is what it's called. This is what bullying looks like. Or those are the signs of depression, or, talk to us about this, trust me, or like things like that. It's just, I think there's a lot of idea that there's a big idea that children are to trust their parents because they're your parents. Just that there's so much that it still needs to be in our society. You know, a lot of cultural changes need to take place where there is then open communication from both sides, right? So the parents act as role models and talk about their feelings and talk about what looks like for them, you know. And of course, you know, it can be in a way shaped in a way that a child or a teenager of that given age understands. And of course, as a parent, you want to protect the child. Nevertheless, it is shaping them, it's helping them see what feelings look like, what emotions look like, and can be experienced in my behavior, in my body. So it makes it okay, and also helps them cope with their feelings, right? Otherwise, it is likely for them to hide from their parents. And their best friend who might not know how to handle either, or just handle through heroin or substance, you know, and then like, if they have a big secret, do they have somebody to share that secret with? So there was a lot packed in 4 seasons and a few episodes, you know, 50 minutes. It might not be the reality for like one given school to show every single event that happened there, but it is likely that all those events happen across the country and across the world, and not a lot of conversation is out there to help those children cope with and maybe prevent those events from happening too.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully said. I agree. It's like, yeah, might not be happening at this school, right, all at once, and how much can you fit in a 50-minute episode? But these things are happening, whether we want to admit it or not. They're happening. So whether it is bullying or suicide, I mean, pick your poison. Like, these things are going to happen. But yeah, I think what's important is, what does that follow-up look like? How do we talk about these things at the dinner table? Yeah. How do we give parents the proper psychoeducation to have conversations with their children? Mm-hmm. How can we do this at a young age? So when they're experiencing anxiety or depression, or they know someone who is, they know how to manage that and handle it and have a safe outlet that they can go to. And not all kids have that. So we can't bank on them saying, go to a trusted adult. They might not have a trusted adult. Yeah. So how can we be better at that? If we know better, we need to be better. So I think you captured it really well. Is even if it's not all happening at Liberty High, these things are happening and they're real and they're here. What are we going to do about it?
Sure. And there obviously there's no blueprint to talking about these things, but as both of you mentioned, it's just really starting the conversation, and it's may not go perfectly, and these things are difficult to talk about, even for mental health providers. I think at times they're difficult to talk about. So a parent or a teacher or anybody at school, it's going to be just as difficult or even more difficult. And I also want to add that, you know, I have that first impression when I watched it, you know, wow, this is really dramatized. There's a lot going on here. You know, this is actually, but when I take a step back and I even think about my own experiences in grade school and high school, everything that happened, I feel like I could at least say, oh, I knew somebody who was working through substance abuse in their teenage years, or oh, I knew somebody who was bullied, and it was around me. Of course, it didn't happen all at once, but those experiences all happen. I think for a lot of us, we can at least point to an individual or something that we've heard, and even if it's not a direct traumatization, it's still trauma, right? And I don't mean to use that word lightly, but these are traumas that could occur consecutively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, there, you know, and like you said, there's big T trauma, but then there's also little T trauma, which is the daily things that happen. And no one can say whether or not your trauma is real or not real. If your brain is perceiving something as a threat, it's trauma. So yeah, we might not even think of it as trauma, but it is. It's there. It's absolutely. I completely agree with you. Yeah. You have to take a step back and really just take the whole overall picture of what they're trying to convey. And right. I'm very nitpicky at first. So.
And I understand how even the TV show advocates, you know, for the children or teenager to watch with their parent or an adult, somebody who is more of age, and they can talk to them and say and check in on them. I don't know if people are actually doing that. You know, it's hard. I'm glad that the TV show put that alarming, you know, like the warning message and whatnot. It's just that we talk about so many other movies or TV shows that also portray scenes of mental health conditions, right? Or trauma, or even sometimes paint this person or character as a hero, and they're like, no, but in society we don't want that, you know. And we're okay talking about those things, but we're not okay talking about things that actually happen and they can actually be detrimental to one's mental health.
I completely agree. There's a lot of cognitive dissonance that happens, and you're right. And you know, sometimes we see, like you said, they're portrayed in TV shows or movies, and sometimes that could be glorified. Sometimes it can also, something that bothers me so much is when mental health isn't portrayed accurately, or that the improper terms are used, or people are called crazy or psycho when that's not appropriate or a thing. So I do like that the 13 Reasons Why portrays, like, yep, that's an anxiety attack, like that's panic, that's substance use, that's, you know, depression. So I do like that. And I think you're right. There is that disconnect between what we see in our society and our culture and what we see on TV. So it's definitely, I think, a lot to unpack there. It's something I love talking about, and I think it's important that we as mental health professionals really continue that conversation, and normalizing conversation is so important.
Even the way trauma was portrayed in their last season, you know, I mean, I think as mental health professionals, we probably picked up on that in the beginning, like, well, this is dissociation, this is trauma. Finally, we're talking about trauma here, you know, with this character. We're never talking about trauma here. Like, how is he not okay? I mean, how is he okay all the time, right?
Right, absolutely.
Three seasons of suppression finally came out in the fourth season.
That's how I felt. Like, the third season kind of frustrated me, because I'm like, God, like, why are we, come on, like, this is clearly traumatic. Like, anyone who goes through this is going to be traumatized. How is this processed? And then as they talk about it in the fourth season, I'm like, yes, like, I'm just getting excited on my couch. Like, fantastic. You know, the therapist that I think Clay was seeing, the dissonance they were talking about, or dissociation. And I'm like, yes, like, this is what we need to see. Is that these positive interactions with a mental health professional. This is trauma. Because you're right, it was 3 seasons of just suppressed anxiety and trauma, and like, that's just a recipe for disaster.
And the mental health profession, I know we're talking about characters here, but I think it was maybe one of the first times that I saw a mental health professional that I could possibly relate to, or see myself in some conversations. You know, I'm not saying everything is okay. It's just that I go, wow, okay, this is more accurate. You know, I just, wow, yeah.
I agree. I was happy to see that, like, yes, this is what it should look like. This is what a therapist should be doing for someone.
So yeah, there's so much still to talk about, and I do hope that people talk about not only 13 Reasons Why, but the contents per se.
Right.
Criticizing that 13 Reasons Why is bad for you. You know, it's just the topics that it brings about and addresses throughout the series. I think we are to talk more about it in society, in the family system, and yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
And thank you so much. I mean, this has been so informative for us, for me and Ronnie, for sure. And I hope to our listeners too. I believe it was so too, to our listeners and viewers here. And thinking about, you know, how many children and teenagers are suffering with mental health symptoms and diagnoses or conditions. You know, this time here, just like our 15 minutes or 1 hour conversation, has helped us see, I guess, what mental health professionals can do and our role in not just the school setting, but also the school setting. And I mean, this is great. Thank you.
Yes, and again, I want to say thank you for joining us. You're a wealth of knowledge and information, and we thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. So please come back. We'll get more into other topics, because we really didn't. We try to touch on a lot of things, but there's so much to talk about. Such a great conversation.
Yes, like, you're so welcome, and thank you guys. I mean, I love it. Clearly, I like talking about this stuff. Yeah, I think what you guys are doing is amazing, and just opening up that conversation is so important. So I will absolutely be back.
Thank you so much. This means a lot to the two of us for sure. And I hope you all stay Psyconnect with us in between episodes. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Our handle is Let's Psyconnect, all one word. And if you want to reach out to us, if you don't know how to follow Dr. St. Jean, Dr. St. Jean, so you share how they can reach out to you.
Yeah, so I am on Instagram at Dr. Brittany St Jean. I also have a website, brittanystjean.com. But if you want to reach out to me, absolutely just DM me. I think that's the easiest thing. I think my email is also on my Instagram. And let's talk, let's connect.
Awesome. And if you didn't catch all of that, that's okay. We're going to post her handle and contact information whenever we post this episode, so you can visit our social media. Again, Let's Psyconnect. And you can send us an email at discussion@letspsyconnect.com. And remember, Let's Psyconnect.